Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Ratu Aisyah binti Sorisam. In this presentation, we are going to present regarding interrelationship of the skeletal muscular system to the skeleton and how they function together biomechanically. We are going to present regarding anatomy of wrist. For introduction, the wrist is a complex anatomical structure that plays a crucial role in the movement and functionality of the hand and forearm. The wrist joint, also referred to as the radiocarpal joint, is a condyloid synovial joint of the distal upper limb that connects and serves as a transition point between the forearm and hand. The radius and ulna, not technically bones of the wrist, but they are closely associated with the wrist structure and function. They form part of the forearm and play a crucial role in wrist movement and load transmission. Now I'm going to share with you the anatomical perspective of the wrist. Wrist is a complex joint that serves as the transition between the forearm and the hand. The anatomical structure of wrist or carpus consists of bones, joints, ligaments, muscle, tendons, nerve, and also blood vessels that form the connection between the forearm and the hand. I'm going to share with you the location of radius and ulna. Radius is located at the lateral bone of the forearm, which is at the thumb side, and articulates with proximal row of carpal bones, primarily the scaphoid and lunate bones forming the radiocarpal joint. While for ulna, it is located at the medial bone of the forearm, which is on the little finger side. Unlike the radius, the ulna does not directly articulate with the carpal bones. Instead, it is connected to the wrist via the triangular fibrocartilage complex, which includes the articular disc between the ulna and carpal bones. We have 8 carpal bones arranged in 2 rows, which are proximal row and also distal row. As we can see in the diagram, proximal row consists of scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, and pisiform, while distal row consists of trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, and hamate. Moving on to joints, the wrist includes several joints that facilitate movement. We have radiocarpal joints, midcarpal joints, intercarpal joints, and also carpometacarpal joints. For ligaments, ligament provides stability by connecting bones to each other. We have intrinsic and extrinsic ligaments. For muscle, muscle facilitate movement and provide stability. We have extensor muscle and also flexor muscle. For tendons, tendons attach muscle to bones, enabling wrist and hand movement, and nerve run through the wrist, supplying sensation and motor control to the hand. For the biomechanical perspective, the biomechanics of the wrist refer to the how wrists move and handle forces during various activities. It involves understanding how the bones, muscles, and tendon work together to allow your wrist to perform movement and how it stays stable and strong. We have 5 biomechanical perspectives of wrist, which are kinematics, wrist movement, load distribution and force transmission, muscle function and coordination, joint stability, and also functional implications. For kinematics, the wrist is capable of various movements, including flexion, extension, radial deviation, ulnar deviation, and circumduction. For flexion and extension, flexion is when wrist bends toward the palm, the carpal bones glide over each other and the radius, with the proximal row moving posteriorly relative to the distal row. While for extension, the wrist bends backwards away from the palm, the carpal bones glide over each other in the opposite direction, with the proximal row moving anteriorly relative to the distal row. For radial deviation and ulnar deviation, radial deviation is the wrist move toward the thumb side, the proximal carpal row shift toward the ulna, while the distal row shift toward the radius. While for ulnar deviation, the wrist move toward the little finger side, the proximal carpal row shift toward the radius, while the distal row shift toward the ulna. For circumduction, it is the ability to perform circular motion is a result of combining flexion, extension, radial deviation, and ulnar deviation. This movement is crucial for tasks that require a wide range of wrist motion. For the load distribution and transmission, the wrist experiences forces during activities such as pulling, pushing, lifting, and weight-bearing exercise. Understanding how these forces distribute across the wrist joint is crucial for preventing injuries and optimizing performance. For load transmission, the radius transmits most of the load from the hand to the forearm, while the ulna provides stability and support. Force transmission, forces generated by muscle in the forearm and transmitted through tendons to the wrist, facilitating movement and grip strength. Ligaments and joint capsules provide stability while bearing loads. For muscle function and coordination, muscle in the forearm contract and pull on tendons, which move the wrist and fingers, like this. For joint stability, ligaments surrounding the wrist joint provide stability and limit excessive motion, preventing dislocation and subluxation. For functional implication for grip strength, it involves the coordinated action of forearm muscles and intrinsic hand muscles. Strong grip forces place substantial loads on the wrist joints. For precision handling, require fine control of wrist position and stability, facilitated by the coordinated activity of the flexor and extensor muscle.
I am Farha binti Habibul Mutsidin and I will continue the presentation. So as Saidatul Aisha had explained just now, we can see that the wrist is a complex joint that bridges the hand to the forearm, where it is actually a collection of multiple bones and joints. So the bones comprising the wrist include the distal end of radius ulna and 8 couple bones. So how the wrist bones are related to each other? It is actually by the attachment and articulation where it involves ligaments and joints, and I will explain about it here. So at the left side, you can see that these are the articulation between the couple bones where it can be divided into 3 sets of joints. Let's see the image on the right side. So the first set of joints is the couple metacouple joint where it formed by the articulation between the distal row of couple bones and the proximal metacouple. Next, the mid-couple joint. It formed by the articulation between the proximal row of couple bones and the distal row of couple bones. The last part is the radiocouple joint, where it is formed by the articulation between the radius and the proximal row of the couple bones. Primarily, it is the scaphoid and lunate. Here, I show you the distal forearm bone. So in wrist anatomy, it also involves a radiocouple joint, where it is formed by the articulation between the radius and the proximal row of the couple bones, primarily the scaphoid and lunate. So as you can see in this picture, the radius is larger at the wrist end, meaning that and obviously it is the primary bone that involved in wrist articulation compared to the ulna that is located on the medial side. It has a minimal role in the wrist joint. So next, I will explain about the ligament. Ligament is the structure that will connect the couple bones to each other, provide stability, and maintaining proper alignment during movement at the wrist. So there are 2 types of ligament here involved in the wrist anatomy. The first one is intrinsic ligament, where it connects the bone with the bones within the wrist itself. There are 2 examples here, which is the first one is lunotriquetral ligament, where it connects between the lunate and the triquetrum. The second one is scapholunate ligament. I already highlighted there with the red dotted line. So it shows the connection between the scaphoid and lunate bone. Next, we move on to the second type of ligament called extrinsic ligament. So it connects the response to the radius, ulna, and metacarpal bones. So there are a few examples here. The first one is radioscaphal ligament, next radioscaphal capitate ligament, long radiolunate ligament, ulnocapitate ligament, ulnotriquetral ligament, ulnolunate ligament, and short radiolunate ligament. So, by the name itself, we can see that it connects between two bones. For example, radioscaphoid ligament. It shows the connection between the radius and the scaphoid. Ulnolunate ligament. It shows the connection between the ulna and the lunate. Same goes with the other. In this slide, I will show you the main ligaments that involve in the wrist movement. The first one is the palmar radiocarpal ligament. It extends from the distal radius and passes obliquely downwards and medially to attach to the scaphoid, lunate, and capitate bones. The second one is the radial collateral ligament. It connects the radius to the scaphoid and trapezium and provides the lateral stability. Next, ulnar collateral ligaments. It connects the ulna to the triquetrum and pisiform and providing the medial stability. We also have the dorsal radiocarpal ligament. It extends from the distal radius to the proximal row of carpal bones, specifically to the scaphoid, lunate, and triquetrum. Next, we have the palmar intercarpal ligaments and dorsal intercarpal ligaments, where it connects the carpal bones on the dorsal and or palmar sides, connecting the adjacent carpals together.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Bushyana Aisyah binti Ahmad Farid, and I'm going to continue the presentation by explaining how the anatomical structure or the part assigned, which is the wrist, are well suited to perform the function that they do. Firstly, we have the joint. So, what is joint? Joint is the part of the body where two or more bones meet. Joint can allow movement of the wrist such as flexion and extension, radial and ulnar deviation. It also helps in distributing and absorbing the forces transmitted through the hand and wrist during various activities. The joint is stabilized by several ligaments, including the palmar and dorsal radiocarpal ligaments and the radial and ulnar collateral ligaments. There are three types of joint that should be highlighted at the wrist. First, we have the carpal metacarpal joint, mid-carpal joint, and radiocarpal joint. So, carpal metacarpal joint, the primary function of CMC joints, especially the CMC joint of the thumb, is to allow wide range of the thumb movements, including opposition, which is essential for gripping and pinching. The CMC joints of the finger provide stability and limited degree of flexion and extension, which are crucial for the hand's overall dexterity and grip strength. Next, we move to the mid-carpal joint. So, mid-carpal joint contributes to the wrist range of motion, particularly in flexion, extension, and radial and ulnar deviation. It enhances the wrist overall flexibility and helps in smooth transition of movement between the proximal and distal carpal bones. For the radiocarpal joint is the primary joint responsible for the wrist major movement, including flexion, extension, radial deviation, and ulnar deviation. It allows the hand to move up and down and side to side. The joint plays a crucial role in the wrist's ability to perform a wide range of tasks, from lifting and carrying to precise manipulations. Next, we move to the second part, which is the ligaments. Ligaments act as strong bands of connective tissue that help hold the bones of the wrist together. They provide structural support and stability to the joint. It also helps to reinforce the integrity of the joint capsule by helping to maintain the alignment of the bones and preventing dislocation or subluxation of the joint. It also can help control the range of motion of the wrist joint by limiting excessive movement in certain directions, such as hyperflexion or hyperextension. Ligament also distributes force evenly across the joint surfaces during movement, reducing the risk of uneven stress on the bones and cartilage. This is the ligaments that we have at the wrist area. First, we have the palmar carpal ligaments. These ligaments extend from the radius to the carpal bones on the palmar, which is the front side of the wrist, providing stability and limiting excessive extension. Second, we have the dorsal carpal ligaments. These ligaments run from the radius to the carpal bones on the dorsal, which is the back side of the wrist, helping to prevent excessive flexion and stabilize the joint. Third, we have the ulnar collateral ligament. This ligament connects the ulna to the carpal bones on the ulna, which is the middle side of the lateral, supporting ulnar deviation and stabilizing wrist on the pinky finger side. Fourth, we have the radial collateral ligament. This ligament connects the radius to the carpal bones on the radial side, which is the lateral wrist, supporting radial deviation and stabilizing the wrist on the thumb side. Five, we have the intercarpal ligament. These ligaments connect the various carpal bones to each other, maintaining the integrity and stability of the carpal arch and enabling coordinated movement between the carpal bones. Lastly, we move to the muscle and tendons. Tendons connect your muscle to your bones and let us move our limbs. So, what is exactly the muscle is? Muscle is a body tissue consisting of long cells that can contract and produce motion. Next, we move to the muscle. There are two types of muscle, which is flexor muscle and extensor muscle. First, we move to the flexor muscle. We have flexor carpi radialis, which help to flex the wrist and aids in radial deviation. Second, we have the flexor carpi ulnaris. It helps to flex the wrist and aids in ulnar deviation. Third, we have the palmaris longus, which assists in wrist flexion. Second, we move to the extensor muscle. First, we have the extensor carpi radialis longus. Second, we have the extensor carpi radialis brevis. Both help in extend the wrist and aid in radial deviation. Third, we have the extensor carpi ulnaris. It helps to extend the wrist and aids in ulnar deviation. Lastly, we move to the tendons and sheath. Tendons of this muscle are encased in synovial sheath, which reduce friction and facilitate smooth movement. This is essential for efficient and pain-free wrist motion.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nariba binti Mama Anwar and I will continue the presentation by explaining the physiology of muscle contraction. Before I proceed, here are the muscles that involve during various movements such as flexion, extension, ulnar deviation and also radial deviation that has been explained by my friends before. Let's continue with the physiology of muscle contraction. In this part, we will look at how those muscles contract and work together to produce movement just like flexion and extension. Basically, there are several steps that involve during the physiology of muscle contraction, which are the first one is nerves initiation, neuromuscular junction, muscle fiber activation, cross bridge formation, muscle contraction, and also the last part is muscle relaxation, which I will explain one by one. Basically, the process begins when motor neurons in the brain send electrical signals down the axons towards the muscle fibers in the forearm. There are three types of nerve that involve, which are the median nerve, ulnar nerve, and radial nerve, which they are primarily responsible for innervating the muscles of the wrist. And the process continues when the motor neuron releases the neurotransmitter acetylcholine at the neuromuscular junction. It is where the site of the nerve meets the muscle. And acetylcholine will bind to receptors on the muscle cell membrane, which is sarcolemma, and it will trigger an action potential, which is it is an electrical impulse in the muscle fiber. In step 3, which is muscle fiber activation, The process begins after the action potential has been triggered. Then it will travel along the sarcolemma until it reaches the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is a place where the calcium ions is stored. Then the calcium will be released into the cytoplasm of the muscle fiber due to the presence of action potential before. And then the process begins in cross-bridge formation because calcium ions will bind together to the protein troponin on the actin filaments within the muscle fiber. This binding formation will cause the tropomyosin to move away from the myosin binding sites on actin filaments, which it will allow myosin heads to attach to the actin. For your information, cross-bridge formation is a crucial part of the sliding filament theory where it describes the interaction between myosin heads and the actin filaments to allow the sliding movement to occur. Continue with the next step in muscle contraction. It begins when the ATP binds with myosin heads in order to provide the energy for the myosin head so that myosin can pull the actin filaments toward the center of the sarcomere. And this action will shorten the sarcomere that will end up cause the muscle contraction. The coordinated contraction of the wrist flexor or extensor muscles will pull on the tendons that attach to the wrist bone that end up will resulting in wrist movement. The process has come to the end when the nerve signal stops, acetylcholine is no longer released, and the action potential also will stop or cease. And the calcium ions that has been released before also will pump back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, causing the troponin and tropomyosin to return to their original position, covering the myosin binding site on actin. So, without calcium, myosin heads detach from actin and the muscle fibers relaxes, allowing the wrist to return to its resting position. So that's all for the physiology of muscle contraction. The median nerve, radial nerve, and ulnar nerve are the primary nerves that will work together to control the movement of the hand and wrist, enabling a wide range of function. I will continue the presentation with the radiograph of the wrist. As you can see here, there are two radiographs in this slide with different views of the wrist. Image 1 shows the PA projection of the wrist, and image 2 shows the lateral projection of the wrist. Basically, PA and lateral projection of the wrist are commonly performed in clinical or hospital setting in order to assess the bones and joints of the wrist to look for any fractures, dislocations, or any other abnormalities. The standard central point for this projection is perpendicular to the midcarpal. We must include at least 1/4 of distal radius ulna and 1/2 of the proximal metacarpals to complete this projection of the wrist. For the PA projection of the wrist, the image is taken from the posterior, which is back, to the front, which is anterior side. In performing PA projection, the hand and wrist are flat on the table with fingers slightly flat to make sure that to make it full contact with the table surface. To reach the criteria of the PA projection, the radiograph should clearly show the spaces between the carpal bones as well as the radiocarpal joint space in order to allow for the evaluation of joint integrity and the detection of any joint abnormalities or arthritis. For the lateral projection of the wrist, there are two criteria to indicate that it is a true lateral. The first criteria is distal end of scaphoid and PC4 must be superimposed to each other, and the distal radius and ulna also must be superimposed to each other. Here are the two sketches of wrist in PA and lateral projection. For the PA view of the wrist, we will see the bones from the back of the hands toward the palm, and here's how the wrist bones are positioned in the PA view. For the proximal row, we have scaphoid, lunate, and triquetrum, where the scaphoid is positioned towards the thumb side of the wrist, while lunate is located next to the scaphoid, which is closer to midline of the wrist. And triquetrum is positioned next to the lunate, which is toward the pinky side of the wrist. Continuing with the distal row, we have trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, and hamate, where the trapezium is positioned below the scaphoid on the thumb side of the wrist, and trapezoid is located next to the trapezium towards the midline of the wrist. Capitate is positioned next to the trapezoid towards the pinky side of the wrist, and last one is hamate, which is found just below the triquetrum on the pinky side of the wrist. Continue with the lateral view of the wrist, we will typically observe the bone from the side. And here's how the wrist bones are positioned in the lateral view. For the proximal row, scaphoid is a bone which is located closest to the thumb, which is side of the wrist. And lunate is positioned just next to the scaphoid, which is more towards the midline of the wrist. And trichotillum is found just next to the lunate, which is towards the pinky side of the wrist. And the last part is, which is in distal row, we have trapezium, which is positioned just below to the scaphoid on the thumb side of the wrist. And the trapezoid is located just next to the trapezium, which is more towards to the midline of the wrist. And the capitate is positioned next to the trapezoid. And the last one is hamate, is found just below the trichotillum on the pinky side of the wrist.
To sum up this presentation about the wrist anatomy, we conclude that the wrists are some of the most complex parts of body. Their ability to bend, move, and flex helps us complete almost any task or motions. The functions that wrist is able to do depend on a complex structure of multiple bones, joints, soft tissues, tendons, ligaments, nerves, and also blood vessels. So that's all from our groups. Thank you.